In this episode, we're going to take up a document that found itself attached to the Smalcald Articles.
In fact, for a time, people mistakenly believed Luther was the author, but the original author actually was Melanchthon.
As we've mentioned in previous episodes, Melanchthon changed some of the language he used in his theological writings and textbooks.
This is readily apparent in what he wrote about the law. It's also found in the language he used with the Lord's Supper.
Recall, Melanchthon was an expert in rhetoric, and wordsmithing was one of his talents. His education approach mirrored Calvin's more than Luther's, as Calvin had been trained as a lawyer. This may be part of the reason Melanchthon can be seen as a little wishy-washy in his views.
Careful, Mr. Historian.
Just the facts, ma'am.
I'll ignore that quip.
Following Luther's writing of the Smalcald Articles, Melanchthon wrote The Power and Primacy of the Pope. The Smalcald Articles could be seen as precipitating this treatise, not in an inspirational way, but actually as an alternative to the Smalcald Articles.
Recall, the Smalcald Articles were written as a response to the Pope calling for the convening of a church council. These articles were intended to set forth what the evangelicals believed to be the true Christian faith, over and against the errors of the papacy.
However, not everyone, hoping to be part of the Smalcald League, could agree to everything Luther wrote in the Smalcald Articles. Therefore, as part of an agreed-upon settlement, the governing authorities decided that all that was necessary was subscription to the Augsburg Confession.
That, too, did not solve the problem, however, as those who had gathered to solidify the Smalcald League recognized a deficiency in the Augsburg Confession. It did not address the issue of the Pope's claim to primacy. Without that issue on the table, the evangelicals would have no voice at any council because they would seem to be conceding all power and authority to the Pope.
So, Melanchthon took up the task of writing what amounts to be an addendum to the Augsburg Confession, addressing the elephant in the room, so to speak.
The document begins by identifying 3 different claims made by the Bishop of Rome. First, to be superior by divine right to all bishops and pastors.
Second, to possess by divine right and power of both swords, that is, the authority to confer and transfer royal authority.
Third, that it is necessary for salvation to believe these things. The evangelicals openly asserted that all 3 of these things are not only false, but harmful.
Melanchthon refuted the first claim that the Bishop of Rome is superior to all other bishops by divine right by pointing to Scripture. He referenced the Gospel writings, such as Luke 22 and John 20, as well as Paul's letter to the Galatians, the 2nd chapter, and his first letter to the Corinthians, the 3rd chapter. Each of these scriptures confirmed that Christ commissioned all apostles as equals.
Next, Melanchthon pointed to the historical record, specifically 7 historical events and traditions that indicate that the Bishop of Rome has not always been recognized as the head of all bishops.
Having set forth the affirmative examples to his argument, Melanchthon took up a defense because Rome, too, used Scripture to substantiate their claims.
Rome pointed to Matthew 16 as inferring Peter's primacy when Jesus says, "On this rock I will build my church." Melanchthon deconstructed this claim by showing that Jesus is referring not to the person of Peter, but to the confession Peter made about Jesus as Lord. Melanchthon backed up this claim by citing the early church fathers as not reading this passage in the same way as Rome.
Next, Melanchthon made short work of Rome's usage of John 21, where Jesus tells Peter to feed my sheep. Melanchthon says it's erroneous to read it as a passage about superiority. It simply commissions Peter to preach Christ's word.
Having addressed the Pope's claim of authority over other bishops, Melanchthon turned his attention to the claim of papal authority over temporal power and rulers. Citing Scripture as blatantly contradicting that claim, Melanchthon outlined numerous abuses and harms that have resulted from claiming the Pope had temporal authority.
The most harmful abuse, said Melanchthon, was the neglect of ministry of the gospel. Christian righteousness was equated with temporal power, and people were told that they had to believe this false claim or suffer consequences for disobeying secular rules.
The third point of contention Melanchthon took up begins with an interesting qualifier, even if. Here, Melanchthon sets out to clarify what determines spiritual authority. Essentially, spiritual authority is not an office established by some sort of code, law, or tradition. Rather, the authority of the office comes from the fact that it delivers the gospel.
Melanchthon minces no words here. He makes it clear that even people claiming to be part of the church, in fact, even people given positions of authority in the church, can actually serve the Antichrist by inventing doctrines and practices that conflict with the gospel.
Like a good lawyer, Melanchthon then proceeded to set forth a litany of such abuses that are found in papal teachings. The logical conclusion is that all Christians must beware of the Antichrist found in the papacy.
He's not being wishy-washy on this topic.
No, he's not. So Melanchthon concludes, quote, "Therefore, even if the Roman bishop did possess primacy by divine right, obedience is still not owed him when he defends ungodly worship and teaching contrary to the gospel," end quote.
The final section of the treatise addresses the power and jurisdiction of the bishops apart from the Pope.
And remember, we said Melanchthon was very consistent on this point. We can see it as he begins the section with these lines. Quote, "In the Augsburg Confession and the Apology, we have set forth in general what needs to be said about ecclesiastical power. The gospel bestows upon those who preside over the churches the commission to proclaim the gospel, forgive sins, and administer the sacraments," end quote.
This is consistent with what he'd said earlier regarding what gives leaders authority in the church.
Melanchthon then continued by saying the authority of the office of the keys is shared by divine right by all who have a role in the church, pastors, presbyters, or bishops. Pointing to the scriptures and Jerome as evidence for this claim, Melanchthon presses the point forward, stating that there is finally no distinction or power given to the bishops that the other two offices don't have the right to exercise. He makes this point in order to claim that in the instance of ordination, bishops do not have a special role that could not be fulfilled by pastors.
In fact, Melanchthon insists that the church as a whole, meaning all members, retain the right to choose, call, and ordain ministers. This is what 1 Peter 2 refers to as the royal priesthood.
So Melanchthon concludes, quote, "All this evidence makes clear that the church retains the right to choose and ordain ministers. Consequently, when bishops either become heretical or are unwilling to ordain, the churches are compelled by divine right to ordain pastors and ministers for themselves," end quote.
In that vein, Melanchthon continues to the topic of ordination, stating that additionally, the bishops don't have special authority over other rites and rituals such as confirmation and the legal process of excommunication. In fact, such claims have led to abuses in the church by the bishops and have harmed souls.
Finally, Melanchthon brings the essay full circle by stating that because the bishops are beholden to the Pope, they have been defending ungodly doctrine and ungodly worship and have abetted the Pope's violence, as Melanchthon put it.
Simply put, the corruption is from the top down. We'll let Melanchthon have the last words on this matter. Quote, "Therefore, let those who defraud the church know that God will exact punishment for their sin."
That was certainly a clear closing argument. Melanchthon's training here seems to have served him well.